Go ahead, Jim.
Hello, and welcome to this NAEVR and ARVO collaborative webinar focused on the U.S. Department of Defense Vision Research Funding Opportunities. My name is James Jorkasky, and I'm Executive Director at the National Alliance for Eye and Vision Research, or NAEVR. Thank you for joining us today. For the second year, we are thrilled that NAEVR and ARVO were able to partner and bring you this valuable virtual webinar, which is usually held on site every year at the ARVO Annual Meeting. Before I introduce our speaker, Erin Herring from ARVO has a few housekeeping items. Erin?
Thanks, Jim. Please mute yourselves for the duration of the webinar. We want to make sure everyone is able to hear everything being presented. This webinar audio and visuals are being recorded and will be available on ARVO Learn within the coming days. This webinar will conclude with approximately 10 to 15 minutes of live Q&A. To ask a question, use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat feature can also be used to request technical assistance during the webinar. Immediately following the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. Thank you in advance for providing feedback and helping ARVO and NAEVR improve our future offerings. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Erin. Now I'd like to take a moment to provide a brief overview of the importance of DoD Vision Program funding. I have 3 slides, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I wanted to give you the rich history of this program. So through NAEVR advocacy back in fiscal year 2006, Vision was made available for funding, competitive funding, in the peer-reviewed medical research program. Vision did so well in 2006 and 2008 cycles that in 2009, again through NAEVR advocacy, Congress created a dedicated vision research program line item in defense appropriations. And initial funding was anywhere from the 3 to 5 million range. In 2012, under NAEVR's auspices, we conducted a cost of military eye injury study, the first of its kind ever conducted, that estimated the cost from 2000 to 2010 of not only penetrating eye injuries, but also visual dysfunction from traumatic brain injury. And that had a cost of $25.1 billion. But important to note that almost all of that represented the net present value of a lifetime of benefits, lost wages, and family care. As a result of the NAEVR study, Congress increased VRP funding. Again, in 2018, under NAEVR's Educational Foundation AVR, we updated the 2012 study 6 years later, and it reflected the 2000 to 2017 timeframe. And as you can see, the cost increased to $41.5 billion. But again, the majority of that cost of military eye injury reflected the present value of a lifetime of benefits, lost wages, and family care. And we were incredibly pleased that that study was published in Military Medicine Journal in May, June 2019, 2 years ago now. As a result of the study, Congress increased VRP funding to $20 million the last 3 fiscal years. And for fiscal year 2022, we're seeking $30 billion. Erin, next slide, please. So there are a number of different DoD programs, including the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and vision researchers have received more than $235 million since year 2001, including the VRP. And through FY 2020 awards, the VRP has been funded by Congress at $125 million and has made 118 awards for a total of about $116 million, with the 2020 awards currently being negotiated. The FY 2021 program announcements issued in mid-May. Dr. Wang will be speaking about those. And it's important to know that both domestic and international researchers are eligible to apply, and that researchers who successfully navigate the VRP are more likely to apply for and receive awards from other DoD programs in sensory, rehabilitation, or diseases with a visual component, i.e. tuberous sclerosis. DoD research is additive to NAI research, since investigating specific battlefield traumatic injuries results in treatments and products with civilian trauma applications. And the federal investment in the VRP and other programs have significantly developed the field of eye trauma research. And we will conclude with just a few examples, and we featured many of these in congressional briefings. A handheld device to diagnose TBI-related visual dysfunction, an ocular patch that seals lacerations and perforations on the battlefield to protect the eye during transit, a computer model to evaluate blast waves and their impact, and a vision enhancement system that uses computer-based object recognition systems to assist in navigation and daily living activities. The VRP activities also support the joint DoD, Veterans Administration, Vision Center of Excellence activities, commercialization of battlefield diagnostics and treatments, alter battlefield protocols for eye injuries. So I'd like to move now to introduce our featured speaker for today. Dr. Tian Wang is the program manager of the U.S. Department of Defense's Vision Research Program, otherwise known as the VRP. Dr. Wang has a BS in biochemistry from Peking University and a doctorate in biochemistry, molecular biology, and cell biology from Northwestern University. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Biochemistry at Stanford University Medical School. And before joining the congressionally directed medical research program, she was an assistant professor of biological sciences at the University of Illinois in Chicago. David Epstein and I have been working with Dr. Wang for several years now. It's been an absolute pleasure. She's been an incredible manager for this program and very responsive in all ways. So Dr. Wang, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Aaron. It's really a great pleasure to be giving this webinar for a second time. The first time that ARVO and NAEVR hosted it was last year. It was really an adaptation to the pandemic. So it was in person before that, but since the pandemic, ARVO and NAEVR switched it to virtual. It's been a great success. And I do regret not being able to see everyone in person. And hopefully this can be changed next year in Denver. But I am excited to tell you today about VRP's FY21 funding opportunities, and I will be happy to answer questions in the end. And so, Erin, can you switch to the webinar talk?
Yes, I've given you mouse and keyboard control, so you should be able to advance.
Oh, okay, so let's see. Okay, so what do I do to advance? Trying to find, okay, here is the button. Yeah. And before I begin, I do have a disclaimer. Basically, this says what I say should not be interpreted as official policy or position. Where is... Just a little bit about the birth of CDMRP, where the VRP is located, the history of CDMRP. In 1992, there was a group of breast cancer patients. They organized a hugely successful letter writing campaign, sending tens of thousands of letters to Congress and also to the president at the time. So in response to this campaign, Congress appropriated $210 million to the fiscal year 93 DoD budget to establish a new breast cancer research program. And that was the first program of the CDMRP. And this program was given to the Army to manage. And so Army established the CDMRP as the managing agency for the breast cancer research program. And it was successful. And in later years, other advocates have successfully convinced Congress to set up new programs. And so in FY21, we have 36 research programs and $1.6 billion in total congressional appropriation. And I do want to point out just a little fact about our budgeting process. And many of you may know that very recently, President Biden had sent his president's budget to Congress. So DoD does not request any budget for CDMRP in their request to the president. So in the president's budget, you will not see a single dollar for CDMRP. When this budget reaches Congress, the Congress has appropriation committees and they will add requests for each program of the CDMRP. If they don't request any money, then there will not be money for this program for that year. So there have been cases when a program was set up and then later disappeared because there was no demand for its continued funding. So fortunately for the VRP, we have very strong advocates, and it's been funded consecutively since 2009. And why did Congress establish the Vision Research Program? Before I tell you the epidemiology, I want to give you a little story. It's a real story. In 2003, Danny Wallace is a sergeant serving in Iraq. 2 weeks before Christmas, a car bomb exploded next to him. This left him completely blind. He was evacuated to Walter Reed, and the surgeons did a lot of operations on him, reattached both his retinas, and also replaced the cornea in one of his eyes. So they were able to give back limited vision in one of his eyes, but in the other eye, he was still completely blind. And he was just one of thousands of soldiers who sustained ocular trauma during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And between 2000 and 2017, there were 275,000, actually close to 276,000 eye injury incidents in the US Armed Services. More than 6,000 of those were at high risk of blindness. In addition to injury to the ocular structure itself, we also have traumatic brain injury. So up to the third quarter of 2020, there were more than 430,000 service members who have sustained TBI among US armed services. As many of you know, TBI is associated with a range of visual dysfunction. This range from just a slight light sensitivity to, in the severe cases, total blindness. So this is another way that the vision will suffer even though there is no damage to the ocular system. It is in recognition of this capability gap in the treatment of visual system trauma and in response to advocacy that Congress established the VRP in 2009 to target the causes, effects, and treatments of eye injury sustained in the combat environment. And also, this injury includes common things that not necessarily injury by battle, but also injury to the environmental factors in the combat environment. And this is the a table listing all the programs in FY21 managed by the CDMRP. Vision is highlighted in red. The FY21 budget is $20 million. As Jim pointed out, when VRP was first established, the budget was only $4 million, and in one of the later years, it's even decreased to $3.75 million. And so this right now it's funded at $20 million, and it's really thanks to our many advocates, and Jim and Dave and ARVO and others, and also Blind Veterans Association and many of friends. And it also is thanks to the investigators who were able to do groundbreaking research. This allows NAEVR to highlight what can be done. So basically, NAEVR and ARVO and investigators have helped advocate for investment in vision trauma research, and also have helped the VRP recruit brilliant investigators to work on visual trauma research. Visual system trauma care in the military faces two major challenges. The first is we don't have a good understanding of visual system trauma. And we do have a lot of research in visual disease, eye disease, and that has been supported by NEI. But when it comes to visual system trauma, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of gaps in our understanding. So one of the two major challenges is to increase this understanding and then translate this knowledge into medical solutions. The second half of this coin, the other side, the second challenge is how to save eyesight when specialists are not available. This I'm talking about in the military operational environment. And for those of you who have had a chance, had some opportunity to learn about military healthcare, you may know that there are limited medical capacities close to the point of injury. So there are different, what we call different echelons of care or role of care. And starting with the point of injury, when you do basically self-help or body help, and then advance to different, more sophistication. But eye injury is even more difficult than managed than other types of injury because it's very specialized. And even in the role 3 care, and there may still often are not an ophthalmologist to operate on the eye. There may be general surgeons, but general surgeons do not know how to treat eye trauma, how to operate on the eye. So this challenge means that we have to expand our forward care capability. Forward care meaning caring in the healthcare in the forward environment. And basically, to really improve visual system trauma care, we need to improve our understanding of visual system trauma and have more solutions. And then we have also need to turn that solutions, adapt those solutions to the forward environment, basically to expand our forward care capability. The VRP's focus areas are really aligned to these challenges. We have received some questions from the registrants before the webinar. There are a number of questions on what kind of research DoD is interested in, and these are the areas we're interested in. So the first challenge, as I said, is to advance understanding and therapeutic development for visual system trauma. We have two focus areas aligned to this challenge. And the first focus area is extremely broad. And this basically says eye injury or visual dysfunction is related to military relevant traumatic event. And this is designed to be broad. What we meant for this to cover is if you are studying an eye injury or visual dysfunction that is related to a military relevant trauma, you can fit into this focus area. And we fund research on injury across the visual system. This includes obviously the anterior segment, posterior segment, but also the central visual pathway. And we fund research on injury caused by a variety of trauma, and some are listed here, but this is not exhaustive. The listed ones include blast, penetrating, blunt, thermal, chemical, but you can think of others. And there's also trauma caused by directed energy weapons. I guess the more common ones that we may encounter is laser. And recently there is maybe a new threat of high power microwave. And these are all considered relevant to the military. So if you're working on understanding or treating trauma across the visual system, related to any one of these events, any one of these trauma, you fit under this focus area. A second focus area aligned with the first challenge is restoration of visual function after trauma-related vision loss or severe visual impairment. And this is not this is after the eyes has been cared for and yet the function has been lost, and then how to restore function. A lot of it is basically visual prosthesis. We have funded many visual prosthesis awards and also visual aid awards. And the second challenge, expand forward care capability, is aligned with our third focus area, diagnosis, stabilization, and treatment of eye injuries in austere environments and prolonged field care settings. And in this case we are encouraging people, this is very specialized for military. So in this case, we encourage people to take maybe existing solutions or existing tools and to see how they can be used or adapted to an environment that is remote. There may not be readily available medical professional or even electricity, and evacuation may not be immediate due to enemy fire. So what can we do in this environment? If we cannot immediately treat, how can we stabilize? But before stabilization treatment, how can we even diagnose this if you don't have an OCT? If you basically have very limited resources. So that's the third focus area. Okay, so we think there are critical work to be done across the entire research pipeline, from building hypotheses and develop initial ideas to the development of these ideas, knowledge and technology further, and to the translation of the findings, and eventually to clinical trial. By the way, our money, the funds we received, cannot be used to fund bigger like phase 3 clinical trials. This is based on budgetary laws or regulations. So we can fund up to early clinical trials, but not beyond that. And because there are things to be done across the research pipeline, we offer award mechanisms trying to cover this research pipeline. And in the past 3 years, we have offered investigator-initiated research award in 2 funding levels. Funding level 1 is to fund the initial idea development. Funding level 2 is to fund the further development of the ideas and knowledge and technology. And we have also offered something in the translational space, translational research award. And this has a pilot clinical trial option, which I will explain in a short while. And we have offered a team science award called Focus Translational Team Science Award, or FTTSA. And in FY21, we added another award mechanism to the mix. We added clinical trial award to fund early phase clinical trials. And the idea of funding across the pipeline is that we think there are research that are ready to take off in these later stages, and we want to be able to give the investigators support. Some investigators, because our funds is limited, but we want to give some opportunity. But we don't want to give up on cultivating early ideas, because these are the foundations for translation and clinical trial in future years. Okay. Some of you have looked up the funding opportunities in grants.gov. We released them earlier in May, I believe May 14th. And these are the 2 documents you will find for each funding mechanism if you search in grants.gov. And what I have here posted here is IIRA and also the general application instructions. This document is the program announcement, which we call PA, for IRA. And each PA also comes with a general application instruction, which actually is the same for all PAs, but in each funding opportunity package, you'll be able to download 2 documents. On the first page of the PA, you will see the key dates. For example, you will see that pre-applications are due July 21st. Full application, if you're invited to submit a full application, are due November 16th. And we're going to do peer review next January and programmatic review next March. And last year, many people asked questions about eligibility. And I do see that some of you still have eligibility questions this year. So I inserted the slide to answer the questions. So basically, for all of the mechanisms we offer, the PI needs to be independent investigators. And so for those of you who have questions about funding opportunity for postdoc and students, unfortunately, we are not offering that yet. I know some of CDMRP's program have this kind of funding opportunities, and those programs have many much bigger appropriation. So for VRP, we're still limiting award mechanisms for PIs that are independent already. And the FTTSA is a little even more high standard. We have an overall lead PI. This PI must be not just independent, but at or above the level of associate professor or equivalent. And not only that, this person we expect to have demonstrated success in leading large collaborative research projects in the past. So this should come across in the biosketch. And because FTTSA is a team science award that allows 3 to 5 projects, and so each project will have a leader, and each person can only lead 1 project. So which means that in addition to the overall lead PI, there are project leaders. Those leaders must also be independent investigators. Okay. And as Jim mentioned, foreign institutions can apply, and basically, as long as you can register in SAM and apply for NIH grant, you can apply to our grant. And there are, I believe there are some countries that cannot register in SAM, therefore they cannot apply to NIH. In this case, they cannot apply to our award either. And the first step of the application is pre-application. And this is due July 21st. I want to say that you really want to work well with your business official to let them know when you are ahead of time you are submitting this, because in this process they have a role to play. They need to click some buttons. And even though in the end, the PI has to click submit, but your business official has a role to play. So they should know to anticipate working with you. Anyone who meets the eligibility can submit a pre-application, but you do need to register in EBRAP. You don't need to have a military partner to apply to VRP funding. And I just want to say there's no submission cost. I know that maybe some of you have heard of MTech funding opportunities, and for those you need to join a consortium, and there is a cost to your institution, I believe. But for VRP and for any program that CDMRP manages, you don't have a application cost. And the pre-application submitted is very short, so it shouldn't be a lot of effort to submit a pre-application. And the pre-application submitted will be screened. The criteria for screening are detailed in the program announcements. And the purpose of pre-application screening is to determine the technical merits of the pre-application and the relevance to the mission of the Defense Health Program and the VRP. And of course, this can be done only to a limited degree because these pre-applications are short. But it gives us a taste of, for example, what are the aims? What are the rationale and background of the proposed idea, and what are the general idea of study design? And do they form a coherent plan in some way on a bigger scale? And also, the overall goal is how relevant it is to the VRP, whether it meets the intent of the award mechanism. So it's based on these bigger pictures that the VRP programmatic panel will screen the pre-applications and select which ones to invite to submit a full application. And I just want to say that, note that we use the word screen. It's not really a review. And this is not a precision science. And invitation is also a balancing act, because we are aware, we're cognizant of the burden on applicants who are submitting a full application. So we have a funding rate to consider. We don't want to invite too many. And then if we invite too many, that means that many of you will be wasting your time because we can only fund very limited number. And we also have to consider whether it's cost effective for peer review if we invite more than we can handle. But at the same time, we want to have a pool of good proposals to choose from when we consider full funding. So this is a balancing act. And submission of full application is by invitation only. Okay. And if you are invited and submitted full application, the full applications will be reviewed in a two-tiered process. And this was recommended to us by the National Academy of Medicine. This is a process that CDMRP have been using since it's first established in 1992. And has been audited by multiple times and was found to be an effective process. And the goal of this two-tier is to find scientifically meritorious proposals and fund those that best fulfill program goals. So we have peer review and programmatic review. The first, by the way, here is the link here. You can find out more about the two-tier review process by following this link. Okay, the peer review is the first tier. In this tier, what I meant is that a group of peer reviewers will use criteria-based evaluation to examine the full applications. And of course, the peer review criteria are outlined in the program announcement. It's a lot of details. So for each criteria, there are many questions we listed. And those questions are not meant that we don't mean the peer reviewers will consider each of them equally. It's just the list of questions is to give peer reviewer a guide on what he or she may think about when reviewing a proposal. It will give you a taste of what you can think about when you craft your proposal. So by using this criteria, the reviewers will determine absolute scientific merit against a gold standard. And so in this stage, each of applications are reviewed on its own. It's not compared to other applications, but compared to the peer review criteria, the gold standard. And some of you asked, who are our peer reviewers? Our peer reviewers are recruited based on expertise. We don't have a standing panel. And each year, based on what mechanism we offer, and we will recruit, also on the focus area, we recruit experts based on that. And so for VRP, the focus area has been the same for a few years. So we sort of know the field of expertise we need. But for example, this year, since we added the clinical trial award to review clinical trial projects, we will definitely be recruiting people who have clinical trial experience. And we will also recruit regulatory people with regulatory experience, and to evaluate those clinical trial projects. And one of the features of all CDMRP peer review panels is that we have consumers on the panel, every single panel. Consumers are, the term consumers describe people who have the conditions or disease that the research is meant to help. So for the VRP, many of our consumers are veterans who have suffered eye injury during their service. And many of them are almost blind or have limited vision. And if any of you have served on our peer review panel, and you will see that they review with a special software to help them read the proposals. They don't really review the technical part, but they will weigh in on excuse me, they'll weigh in on what they consider is the impact. So okay, so the reviewers list are posted on the VRP's homepage. The FY20 session, which we just finished, FY20 peer review was conducted earlier this year in January. The list is posted on VRP's webpage, and the previous years are also posted. And FY21 reviewers will not be posted until after funding recommendations are made. And this is to protect their identity and so that replicants will not be talking to them. And the communication is not permitted anyway. So you can take a look at those to see what the caliber of people we recruit. And we have had NIH people as scientific review officers observing our panels and participating. And they confirm that our peer reviewers, many of them also serve on NIH study sections, and it's very similar caliber of people. The second tier is programmatic review. And this tier is a comparative process. So in this review, we determine, we take only proposals of high scientific merit as determined by the peer review. And we further evaluate the adherence to the intent of the work mechanism, relevance to the program goals, potential for impact, military relevance, and then all this, after each proposal is reviewed based on this, we'll also compare them. What is the relative adherence to intent? What is the relative potential for impact, and so on? And we don't have a pay line, so we don't say, oh, if you scored higher in peer review, you will get paid, and this is the pay line. And the reason is because we take into consideration all these other factors that were not considered at peer review. This gives us an opportunity to fund projects that are not only scientifically meritorious, but the programmatic panel believe will be the best fit for the program and can best advance programmatic goals. The programmatic panel. Programmatic reviewers are the VRP programmatic panel, and also sometimes ad hoc reviewers recruited based on specialty expertise. And I want to say that the programmatic panel members' names are posted on the VRP website, and you can take a look. But the purpose of taking a look is so that you can avoid involving them in the design or performance of your project. And many of these so we have a mixture of people. There are only a limited number of scientists because the purpose of programmatic review is not scientific review. We actually specifically ask the panel not to re-review the science that has been already evaluated by peer reviewers. So many of them are military clinicians who have worked with patients with eye injury. And some of them are representative from agencies. For example, we have Dr. Steinmetz from NEI on the panel, and we also have representative from VA, and we also have representatives from DoD organizations that basically they are policymakers, or they can make policies based on findings or research that are sponsored by the VRP. And it is at this level, the programmatic review, that funding recommendations will be made. Okay, and this is a slide I believe many of you are very interested to see. So this is the success rate of our applications since FY18. That's the first year that I became I managed the VRP. In FY18, we had an appropriation of 15 million, and 19 and 20 is $20 million each. And we offer different award mechanisms in those 3 years. For example, expansion award was offered in 18, but not in later. And IRA didn't have 2 levels in 18, but we had 2 levels in 19 and 20. And the overall success rate varies. It varies from 17.5% in FY18 to 32% in 19 to 20% in FY20. And the success rate of each award mechanism also varies. And for example, FTTSA, we invited 6 in FY18 and 19. One of them was recommended for funding, as we had hoped. In FY20, we invited 5, but none of them was competitive enough based on peer review score to be recommended for funding. And then also the numbers also change because of what comes in. So applications for all mechanisms, they are simultaneously considered for funding recommendation. And this means that one mechanism in a given year may outperform another mechanism. And for example, in FY19, we received a large number of outstanding funding level 1 applications. And consequently, a large number of them was recommended for funding, and this is obviously at the expense of other funding mechanisms. And in FY20, we actually raised the funding ceiling for funding level 2 and also for the Translational Research Award. And we also happen to have more Translational Research Award that is outstanding. And we had fewer funding level 1 that's successful and more funding level 2 that's successful. And this we funded fewer awards because funding level 1 is small, funding level 2 and TRA is large. And I also want to point out that for these 3 years, originally we had planned to fund 9, 14, and 14 awards. And we ended up funding 10, 21, and 17, exceeding our goals. And in addition to these, there are possibilities of other agencies picking up our proposals. And for example, we have an agreement with NEI, allowing NEI to select unfunded VRP proposals for funding. So in FY18, NEI picked 2 unfunded VRP awards for funding. In FY19, because this is the year when we finished funding recommendation, the pandemic broke out. So NEI decided to not pick anything for funding. Instead, they will use that money to respond to the pandemic. In FY20, they picked up 1 unfunded VRP proposals for funding. So we do try to leverage other funding agencies' money. If the success rate and the review criteria are too abstract for you to consider how to be successful or what are successful, and in the next few slides, I will give some examples of successful applications. So here is an IRA success, and the title is Prevention of Blindness by Novel Cytoprotective Small Compounds. And this was funding level 2. This was recommended funding in FY19. And here are their aims. This proposal will do pharmacokinetics and will evaluate cytoprotective effects in 3 models of binding trauma, and it will also investigate mechanism of action. So of course it has a lot of pluses, and it scored extremely well, and peer review really liked the design, everything. But I want to highlight two things for you. And one is that we require funding level 2 to have strong preliminary data to support both the rationale and the readiness of the both the feasibility and readiness of the project. So this project has very good preliminary data as deemed by the peer reviewers. They have already developed small molecule inhibitors, and they have patent pending. They have good in vitro efficacy data, and they already conducted initial pharmacokinetics. All this means that they are not only ready, but they can do what they propose. Another plus is that they align well to the VRP focus area. Note that they use 3 models of blinding trauma. So these are all the trauma models they use are considered really good fit. So this obviously programmatic panel like that. So this is one example of success meeting the requirement for funding level 2 IRA. Here's another example. This is a translational research award. And this is the award that was just recently recommended for funding. And this is the FY20 award. Is TRA, also has a pilot clinical trial component. It's a clinical translation of retinal thermal fusion for rapid retinal detachment repair without tamponade. So I want to say that in this case, we have funded an earlier project by the same PI in FY15. So this earlier project allowed the PI to test, to develop and validate device for retinal thermal fusion in large animal. And based on, and he was able to show, so he validated in ex vivo in pig and human eye, and he validated in vivo in rabbits. He was able to show that it meets their expectations and ready for translation. Therefore, this earlier award really provided preliminary data and say, oh, this is a promising result, and it is ready for translational research award. And he has a pilot clinical trial component. Some of them wondered what is pilot. So what makes a trial pilot is that if you have a regular trial you can say phase 1, phase 2, and phase 1 is generally to determine safety, and phase 2 is to determine efficacy. And there could be, of course, secondary outcomes, but the main goal is to determine safety or efficacy. Pilot is not meant to determine either of those. You may get some clues about safety, some clues about efficacy, but your main goal is to see whether what you intend to do, the design, will be logistically doable. For example, also to inform on the design. For example, whether you can recruit the patients that you have in mind, what's the speed of recruitment, and what is the initial, say, difference in the outcome. Based on that, you may do power analysis, and what kind of personnel you will need and to where. And so all these are the pilot clinical trials purpose. And if you have more questions about this, definitely let me know, and I can definitely include that in the frequently asked question that we'll release after the webinar. Okay, finally, this is FTTSA success, and this one was awarded to McGill University in FY18. And FTTSA, we require long-term expectation, short-term goals, and we require a team effort that is multidisciplinary and synergistic. And so here, the long-term expectation is they expect convergence towards commencement of clinical trial within 5 to 8 years and approval of a treatment within 8 to 10 years. And based on this very clearly laid out expectation, they have short-term goals, and which is to target 3 components that are unmet needs in TONG: diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. So these are all very well versed and articulated. And they have a team, 3 teams: translational, pharmacology, neuroimaging. And here are the things each team will do, and they feed into each other. They're both standalone and feed into each other. For example, translational team, they will develop translational models, and they will also use these models to test the therapeutic agents developed by the pharmacology team. And the translational models, after they administer the therapeutic agents, and these models will be imaged by the neuroimaging team to see what changed. So these are just some examples. And you can see how the 3 teams really work together with each other. So that is a good example of FTTSA. Okay, so here is just a very brief summary of how do you of the main strategy for success. You definitely want to understand the goals of the VRP, and for each award mechanism, you want to be clear you understand intent of the award mechanism and the criteria. And these are all in the program announcement. So we don't use PA, we use PA. And here in the announcement, you will find goals, focus areas, award intent, elements, eligibility, funding criteria, deadlines. And you really should read it very carefully, because unlike NIH, our announcement, each one is specially crafted. They're unique. And here are some sections for you to consider. And this is focus area. And the section 2B gives you intent and key aspects of award mechanism. And section 2D2 gives you instructions on what to include for each document. And criteria section, this is the questions that the reviewer will see. So you should write your proposal with this criteria in mind. And if you have questions about the requirements, here's the help desk email and also a phone to call. And I know that pitfalls may seem trivial, but you'll be surprised how many of them make them. Do not include programmatic panel members. Do not get them to write you a letter of support. It's only going to hurt you. The proposal may be thrown out. Do not exceed page limit, and make sure you submit the right files. We've had all sorts of files submitted, include marriage certificate, children's immunization record. So make sure you submit the right ones. Note the deadline and work with your government business officials to make sure you have enough time. And you want to submit, especially important is project narrative and budget, because the other documents, if you made a mistake, you can correct. But these ones, once deadlines pass, you cannot correct them. Okay, so finally, a couple of things about other funding opportunities. Many of you know we have SBIR, we have broad agency announcement. And I just want to say we also have RFI and RPP sometimes come out, and we have a current one. Unfortunately, it's due very soon. You will get this slide deck from be able to view it. So for sake of time, I'm not going to give the details, but these are the current funding mechanisms you can consider. And the resources, the links, and I just want to highlight, these are resources on the VRP homepage. And if you are thinking about something that's specially designed for the combat environment, make sure you read this document, A Beginner's Guide to Army Healthcare System. And that is all I have. And I want to thank you for your interest in the VRP and for your research on visual system trauma. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I just want to clarify for everybody, because I'm monitoring the questions, that you will be receiving, all of you who are on the call today, you'll be receiving a post-webinar email containing links to resources mentioned during the presentation. That includes the PowerPoint presentations. Dr. Wang will also be reviewing all the questions that we won't be able to get to and pulling together some answers for those. So I wanted to let everybody know about that before we get into any specific questions now. I wanted to do one clarification. I mentioned in my presentation that DoD funding was additive to NEI. I meant that in the universal way, i.e. that the traumatic eye injury research being done at the DoD really moves us forward. Remember, NEI doesn't do typically traumatic eye injury research. So I think the person interpreted that as that these are additive to NEI grants. They're quite separate from each other, although Dr. Wang acknowledged that through a joint agreement between DoD and NEI, NEI has the opportunity to potentially fund a couple of grant requests that the DoD is not able to. And Dr. Wang, I think you said that they weren't able to do it last year during the pandemic, but they would like to do it this year.
That's correct.
Great, okay. I have a question for you, Dr. Wang. Are you allowed to submit pre-proposals for several different technologies under different focus areas?
Yes, you can. We don't limit how many you can submit.
So it sounds like that person's going to be extremely busy in the future.
Yes, yeah. We've had people do that before, and sometimes multiple pre-applications are submitted for full applications, and then the PI will have to choose whether to submit all or focus on one. It's their decision.
Great. And we had a question here, and I'm interpreting it very quickly here, but this individual's asking about development of long-term neural consequences. It's possible that that doesn't happen in active soldiers, but is this something that you all would fund, realizing that it could happen in veterans through the years?
So, well, we know that, for example, traumatic brain injury could lead to some sort of long-term effect, maybe degeneration or maybe something that do not show up immediately, but could still be due to the traumatic injury. And this is considered within our scope. If you can show preliminary data and traumatic brain injury models, for example, this really comes up and you can actually prevent it from coming up, you have a project, and this will fit our criteria of focus area.
Wonderful, great answer. I have a quick one here. Will the DoD fund projects that work on vision restoration, such as gene therapy?
Well, if you're using gene therapy to treat disease like congenital eye disease, this we have not funded, and we probably will not fund. Not that it's not important, but we have other priorities we have to get to before that.
Okay, thank you. And a question, to be clear, a pilot clinical trial does not need to involve any human subjects? Also,
the pilot clinical will involve human subject.
Okay, and also, can funds be utilized for GMP manufacturing of drugs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm clicking through all of these right now. Just bear with me. Can you?
I just want to follow on the question about GMP manufacture. So, if you we have supported awards in which there are budget for GMP production, but obviously this has to be considered reasonable for the size of the study. And so if you are considering bulk of the budget goes to production, it's unlikely to be successful, but we don't preclude that.
Okay, thank you. And I think this should be the final question. Again, you'll have all of these to respond to after the briefing, but can you address the issue of possible overlapping with a study funded by NIH?
That's a great question. So first of all, in in the support, each PI or each key personnel will need to support submit a document that's the past, current, and future support. And here you should explain whether there's any overlap between any existing, past, or a grant that is pending. And if there is, this do not preclude you from preclude the proposal from consideration for funding. But if we do make a funding recommendation, we will be asking you about whether your pending award is awarded by NIH. And if so, you'll have to choose which one to take. And sometimes if you're overlapping with one aim or some part, we allow you to take that aim out and only fund the ones that are not funded by NIH. And we do have ability to see, to access NIH database, to access your submitted proposals, the abstracts and the aims. So we can also work with program officers in NIH to evaluate the degree of overlap.
Great, Dr. Wang, thank you so much. So this is a reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be archived on ARVO Learn in the coming days. Additionally, you'll be receiving a post-webinar email containing links to all the resources mentioned during the presentation. And finally, both ARVO and NAEVR ask that you please complete the survey that will automatically launch at the conclusion of this webinar, as it really does help us to inform our future offerings. So we're hitting that 2:01 time right now. Dr. Wang, thank you very much. Aaron from ARVO, thank you very much. Again, on behalf of David Epstein and myself from NAEVR, we appreciate all of you taking your time today. We feel very passionately and strongly about this topic. We've been working on it for many years. We go to the Hill to try to get this funding and then have that funding available for this grant process. So I wish you all a good afternoon. And remember, you will be able to access information. You'll be getting emails from ARVO right after this this webinar. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.